If you've been watching this channel for a while, you'll know I've spent a lot of time talking about retirement in Thailand, and two places always come up more than any others: Hua Hin and Jomtien. And there's a reason for that. For many retirees, those two areas sit right in that sweet spot. You've got enough infrastructure, enough expats, enough healthcare access, and still a fairly relaxed coastal lifestyle that doesn't feel overwhelming. They're not perfect, but they're balanced. And for a lot of people, balance is exactly what they're looking for in retirement. But here's where things get interesting, because not everyone wants that same balance. Some people want something quieter, some want something cheaper, some want something more Thai and less expat, and some people just want a completely different pace of life. And that's where today's video comes in, because I want to talk about three coastal alternatives that keep coming up in conversations: Rayong, Bangsere and Chatham. But I want to be very clear from the start. This is not a top 3 best place ranking, because in reality there is no perfect retirement town. Every single place in Thailand has trade-offs, and the real question isn't what's the best place. The real question is, what set of compromises can you actually live with every single day? Because that's what retirement becomes. It's not a holiday anymore, it's ordinary life. Most people make the same mistake when choosing where to retire in Thailand. They think like tourists. They arrive on holiday, they see a beautiful beach, they have a nice dinner, the weather is perfect, everything feels easy, and they think, yeah, I could live here. But that's a holiday decision, not a life decision. Because retirement isn't about 2 weeks in January. It's about Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. when nothing's happening. A place can feel amazing for a short stay, and completely different when it becomes your everyday environment. That's why I always say this: don't choose based on excitement, choose based on ordinary life. Because ordinary life is what you're actually moving into. And this is where a lot of people end up reassessing places like Hua Hin or Jomtien, or looking for alternatives entirely. So let's start with Rayong. To be honest, I didn't used to know much about Rayong. It wasn't really on my radar when I first started looking at different areas in Thailand. But over the years, I've learned more about it, and it's definitely becoming more popular with retirees who want something quieter and more spread out. Now, what I personally like about Rayong is the space. It feels open, quiet, and very Thai in a lot of ways. It doesn't feel heavily built around tourism in the same way some other coastal areas do. And one of the interesting advantages of Rayong is its access to the islands. You've got Koh Samet nearby, which is a really nice weekend escape. And further out, you've got access towards Koh Chang, which is one of the more well-known islands in that part of Thailand. So if you like getting away from the mainland every now and again, Rayong does offer that option. But here's where we need to be realistic. Rayong is not really one single town. It's a very large province, and that matters more than people think, because your experience of Rayong completely depends on where you actually live in it. Some areas feel coastal, quiet and relaxed. Other areas feel more industrial. And that industrial side is something that surprises some people when they first arrive. Now, I want to be honest about this. Rayong is very quiet, almost too quiet for some people. And I don't say that as a criticism, it just depends on personality. But there is one very important practical point here. You really do need transport, a car, a motorbike. It's not really optional in Rayong, it's kind of essential, because everything is spread out. You're not really living in a walkable environment in most cases. Daily life requires movement. Supermarkets, restaurants, beaches, they're not all on your doorstep. Now, if I'm being completely honest, would I personally live in Rayong? No, I wouldn't. But that's not because it's a bad place. It's simply because it's too quiet for my own lifestyle. I like having things closer together. I like being able to move around easily without needing to plan everything around transport. But I completely understand why some retirees love Rayong. Because if your goal is peace, real peace, low noise, and a slower pace of life, Rayong absolutely delivers that. It just depends whether you want peace or whether you also want convenience alongside it. Now let's move on to Bangsere. Bangsere is interesting because it sits in a very different category compared to Rayong. It's closer to Pattaya, but it's definitely not Pattaya, and that difference is important. You're only about 15 to 20 minutes away from Pattaya, depending on the traffic obviously. So what you get is a kind of buffer zone. You're not in the chaos of Pattaya, but you're also not isolated. And I do like Bangsere. I've spent more time there recently while filming and exploring the area more properly. It has a nice coastline, a slower feel, and it still represents relatively good value compared to nearby locations. But in my opinion, Bangsere feels like a place in transition. More people are discovering it, more development is happening, and over time I think it's going to change quite a lot. Now the biggest strength of Bangsere is balance. You've got peace and quiet, but you still have access to everything in Pattaya when you need it. Shopping, restaurants, expat areas, hospitals, nightlife if you want it, it's all close enough. So for many retirees, that balance is very attractive because it removes the stress of being in a busy city without removing access to the city life completely. But if I'm being honest about my own preference, I still think I would prefer to live closer to Jomtien or Na Jomtien. Because I like being closer to things day to day. I like having more options nearby. So for me personally, Bangsere works better as a place to visit rather than a place I would live full time. But I completely understand why other people choose it, because it solves a very real retirement problem. It gives you peace without cutting you off from everything else. Now let's talk about Chatham. And this is a place I think deserves a bit more attention than it often gets, because it's one of those locations in Thailand that doesn't always stand out immediately. But over time, your opinion of it can actually change quite a bit. When I first came to Thailand, I didn't think much of Chatham at all. To be honest, I thought it was a bit too quiet, a bit too local, and not really developed enough for what I personally was looking for at the time. It just didn't grab me. And I think that's important, because first impressions in Thailand can be very misleading. Some places impress you instantly, and others grow on you slowly over time. Chatham is definitely more of the second type. Now, one of the biggest strengths of Chatham is its location, because you're in a very interesting position here. You're only about 20 to 30 minutes away from Hua Hin, so you can access everything Hua Hin offers, but you're not actually living in the middle of it. And for some people, that's a very appealing balance. You also still have relatively easy access towards Bangkok compared to other coastal towns further south. So Chatham kind of sits in the middle zone. Not too remote, not too busy, not too expensive. It's kind of a buffer location in a lot of ways. And that matters more than people realise when they're thinking long term, because being close to options becomes more valuable as you get older, not less. But let's talk about what Chatham actually feels like day to day, because this is where opinions really split. On weekdays, Chatham can feel extremely quiet, almost sleepy at times. You'll have long stretches of beach that feel very open, very relaxed, and very low pressure. There's no real urgency in the atmosphere. Life moves slowly here, and for some people that's exactly what they want. No stress, no noise, no constant activity. Just a very simple coastal lifestyle. But then something interesting happens on the weekend, because Chatham changes. And this is something that catches people off guard if they haven't experienced it before. On weekends, especially when people come down from Bangkok, the whole atmosphere shifts. You get more traffic, more families, more beach activity, more restaurants full, and a noticeable increase in energy. It doesn't become chaotic like some major tourist areas, but it definitely becomes busier. So what you end up with is almost two versions of Chatham. Weekday Chatham and weekend Chatham. And depending on your personality, that can either be a positive or a negative. Some retirees absolutely love Chatham. They like the simplicity, they like the slower pace, they like the fact it's not overdeveloped, and they like being close enough to Hua Hin without actually being in it. But other people find it too quiet. They say there's not enough going on, not enough social life, not enough stimulation. And both viewpoints are valid. One thing I will say is that my own opinion of Chatham has changed over time. And that's quite important, because when I first came here, I didn't really see the appeal. But the longer I spent time in Thailand, and the more I thought about long-term living, the more I started to understand why people choose it. It's not exciting, it's not flashy, but it's stable. And stability becomes more important the longer you stay somewhere. There's also something quite comforting about being near Hua Hin without actually being in it. Because Hua Hin has grown into a very established retirement hub, so you get access to that infrastructure without necessarily paying Hua Hin prices or dealing with the density of the city. In terms of daily life, Chatham is relatively simple. You've got the basics, local markets, supermarkets, restaurants, beach access, and enough services for day-to-day living. But you're not in a high-dense, high-convenience environment like you would find in larger urban coastal areas. So life here tends to be slower and more routine-based. Now, if I'm completely honest about my own view, Chatham is one of those places I didn't appreciate at first, but I understand it much more now. And if I had to choose one of these three locations at an older age, say around 75, Chatham would probably be the one I'd lean towards. Not because it's perfect, but because of what it offers around it. You've got proximity to Hua Hin, access to Bangkok, a slower pace of life, and enough flexibility if you need to change later. And at that stage of life, flexibility becomes very important, because you're not just choosing for how you feel today. You're choosing for how your situation might evolve in 10 or 15 years. And Chatham gives you more options in that sense. But even with Chatham, it's still important to be realistic. Because like all of these places, it has strengths and it has compromises. And that's actually the main theme of this entire video. Every single location in Thailand gives you something, and takes something away at the same time. Before we compare anything directly, it's worth stepping back, because when people ask what's the best place to retire in Thailand, that's usually not the real question. The real question is, what kind of daily life am I actually trying to build at this stage of my life? Because retirement changes everything. What works at 55 is not what works at 75. And what feels exciting early on eventually becomes less important than comfort, routine and access. So let's look at these places properly, not as holiday spots, but as long-term living environments. Let's start with peace and quiet. In Rayong, you get the highest level of quiet overall, but it's a very specific type of quiet. It's spread out, low density, and in many areas there's not much happening unless you go and look for it. In Chatham, the quiet feels different. It's more structured. The weekdays are calm and slow, but there's still a sense of life and movement around you. And in Bangsere, you get the least quiet of the three. Not because it's noisy, but because you're always close enough to Pattaya that something is happening nearby. But quiet isn't automatically a good thing, because too much of it can start feeling like isolation over time. Now let's flip it and look at convenience. This is where the picture changes completely. Bangsere is the strongest here, mainly because you've got Pattaya right on your doorstep. So hospitals, shopping, restaurants, entertainment, everything is close by. Chatham sits somewhere in the middle. You're not in Hua Hin, but you're close enough to use all of its retirement infrastructure when you need it. Rayong is the weakest in the category, not because it doesn't have services, but because everything is more spread out and you rely on transport far more. So in terms of convenience, Bangsere first, Chatham second, Rayong third. And this is important because convenience becomes more important with age, not less. Now this is where the difference really starts to matter. Rayong works well in the early stages of retirement, when you're still active, independent, and don't mind travelling for things. But over time it becomes more difficult, mainly because of distance and transport dependence. Bangsere benefits from being close to Pattaya, so access to services stays strong. But the trade-off is that it may gradually become more developed and less quiet over time. Chatham, on the other hand, offers the best balance for long-term living. You're close to Hua Hin full retirement infrastructure, but you're not in the middle of it. So for long-term aging, Chatham first, Bangsere second, Rayong third. And this is probably the most important part of it all, because none of these places are better in the absolute sense. They're just different personality matches. Rayong suits people who want space, independence, and a very low density lifestyle where things are spread out and quiet. Bangsere suits people who want balance, quiet living, but with easy access to Pattaya when needed. And Chatham suits people who want simplicity, stability, and proximity to Hua Hin without being right in the centre of it. So there's no real winner, only trade-offs. If you want maximum peace, Rayong stands out. If you want balance and access, Bangsere is the practical middle ground. If you want long-term stability with retirement infrastructure nearby, Chatham is the most flexible option. But the real point is this: retirement isn't about finding the perfect place. It's about finding a place where the daily life feels acceptable every single day. Not a holiday, not a beach, a routine. So I'm interested in your thoughts. If you had to choose one, Rayong, Bangsere or Chatham, which actually fits your version of retirement and why? Because the answer usually says more about your lifestyle than the location itself. Drop it in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you on the next one, guys.